Hello, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Emily, and we are the voices of Tarbis.
What's Tarbis, I hear you ask? Well, Tarbis is a blog that we do together where we visit historical houses or places of historical import and we blog about them, basically giving our opinions on the place, how well it's presented, facilities, things like that, and sandwiches, because we love sandwiches.
And that is in our name. But we decided that we wanted to do another medium. We wanted to do a podcast to talk more in depth about lots of different aspects of history, not just a specific era of the place that we're visiting. So we will go from Stone Age to Victorians, inventors, monarchs, everything here, and you'll hear some of our opinions and what we think, and possibly some debates.
Indeed, and we would encourage you as well to get in touch. You can leave reviews, or you can contact us through our blog, just to see what you think, or if there's any particular people, places, events, things like that you'd like us to talk about. We'd be more than happy to do that.
Yep, so sit back, relax, and enjoy Tarbis After Hours.
The great air battle, which has been in progress over this island for the last few weeks, has recently attained a high intensity. It is too soon to attempt to assign limits either to its scale or to its duration. We must certainly expect that greater efforts will be made by the enemy than any he has put forth. Hostile airfields are still being developed in France and the Low Countries, and the movement of squadrons and material for attacking us is still proceeding. It is quite plain, sir, that Herr Hitler could not admit defeat in his air attack on Great Britain without sustaining most serious injury. If, after all his boastings and blood-curdling threats and lurid accounts trumpeted round the world of the damage he had inflicted, of the vast numbers of our Air Force he has shot down, so he says, with so little loss to himself, if after tales of the panic-stricken British crushed in their holes, cursing the plutocratic parliament which has led them to such a plight, if after all this, his whole air onslaught were forced, after a while, tamely to peter out, the Führer's reputation for veracity of statement might be seriously impugned. We may be sure, therefore, that he will continue, as long as he has the strength to do so, and as long as any preoccupation he may have in respect of the Russian Air Force allow him to do so. On the other hand, the conditions and course of the fighting have so far been favorable to us. I told the House 2 months ago that whereas in France our fighter aircraft were wont to inflict a loss of 2 or 3 to 1 upon the Germans, and in the fighting at Dunkirk, which was a kind of no man's land, a loss of about 3 or 4 to 1, we expected that in an attack on this island we should achieve a larger ratio. This has certainly come true. It must also be remembered that all the enemy machines and pilots which are shot down over our island or over the seas which surround it are either destroyed or captured, whereas a considerable proportion of our machines and also of our pilots are saved and soon again, in many cases, come into action. The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
Immortal words there by the great Winston Churchill. That was his speech that was given about and following the Battle of Britain.
Those words, they literally just bring a chill to my spine.
I got goosebumps. The man was a fantastic orator. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, you'd listen to him, you'd follow him.
Definitely,
I'd follow Churchill.
Without doubt. Now, in case you hadn't noticed, this week's podcast is on the Battle of Britain. And there is a very specific reason for this.
There is.
At the time of recording this, it is the 16th of September. Yesterday, being the 15th, was...
The 78th anniversary of the Battle of Britain.
or one of the most influential days in the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
Because the battle itself lasted for 122 days, was it?
Yeah.
Between the 10th of July to the 31st of October, 1940. And it was really something, wasn't it?
It was basically Hitler was trying to take control of the British skies because he knew he couldn't do it over sea because the English Navy was far superior to the German Navy. So he thought the only way he could get over to England and to conquer Britain was to conquer its skies.
And I think they were acting on false information, or skewed information, shall we say, because they had the idea that, particularly at the point of the 15th of September, that the British Royal Air Force was a lot more depleted than it was, that it was pretty much on its last legs. So they launched an offensive, and quite frankly, it didn't go to plan.
It's not the greatest
No.
in German history.
No, but to start off with, let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
And the first thing to do, I think, would be to talk about the two main players in this.
Yeah.
It was just after the Battle of France.
Yes, it was.
And you mentioned earlier that the Battle of Britain, that was a phrase actually coined by Churchill before the Battle of Britain even started.
Yeah, he did a speech on the 18th of June, 1940, and it was just after the German and the French war. The French had surrendered, and he'd said in his speech, "The Battle of France is over. I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin." So another turn of phrase by the infamous Winston Churchill right there.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, honestly, the man is just... He was responsible for so many phrases, wits and witticisms that he was incredible. But anyway, so it was after that, the German Air Force, Germany as we understand Germany, obviously it wasn't actually properly Germany in the way we know it back then, they had been prohibited from having an Air Force as part of the Treaty of Versailles disarmament clauses. But when the Nazi government were in power, they reinstated the Luftwaffe, and they grew exponentially. But obviously, in response to that, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, became an independent branch of the British Armed Forces in 1918, and they also grew rapidly as a response to the threat from Nazi Germany. So our Air Force grew in response to their Air Force. And there were a load of different types of airplanes that flew, but there were some, I think we can say, fairly iconic ones.
A couple spring to my mind, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. I mean, we've done some research on this, and the websites that we've been using are linked in the notes for the show. So if you want to have a look yourself, by all means, please do.
Yeah.
But the information, basically the main ones, these are about the top 8 or 9.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, the most recognisable, I'd say, for our forces, or the two most recognisable, the Supermarine Spitfire.
Yep.
And the Hawker Hurricane.
Spitfire and Hurricanes.
Yep. The Spitfire, it was originally designed by Reginald Mitchell, and it was one of the main strengths of the Spitfire was that it was fast. It was quite an agile plane. However, did you know it actually took longer to construct each Spitfire than it did a Hurricane, even though the Hurricane was bigger?
Yeah. Well, I do now.
Yep. And it didn't fly until August 1938. Where it flew for the first time with the number 19 squadron out of Duxford.
Ah, Duxford. That's not that far from here.
It's not at all. No, I am ashamed to say I've never been to Duxford.
Don't worry, we shall rectify that. If
Good.
you're in Norfolk now, you need to see Duxford, even though I know it's in Cambridgeshire.
It's all sort of East Anglia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, the Spitfire, they did fantastic. We'll come back to the kill numbers in a minute, but the total number of downed enemy craft by the Spitfires, 529.
Wow.
And they lost 230 Spitfires.
So that's 1-0 to the Spitfires.
Yep. And obviously the Hawker Hurricane, they were spread across 33 different squadrons by the time September 1940 rolled around, so by the time the 15th rolled around. and they themselves accounted for 656 German aircraft.
Wow.
Between the 30th of July to the 16th of September alone, 404 Hurricanes were destroyed.
Wow.
Now when you're just talking like this, it's easy to think of them as just planes, like empty drones. But if you think each one was probably about a 4 to 6 man crew, that's 404 planes of 4 to 6 men. Some of them might have survived, some of them might not.
How many is that? Let's do the math.
It's 404 planes, and if we go for a 4-man crew,
that's 1,616.
And that was just between 30th of July to the 16th of September.
Wow, so what, 5 weeks?
Yeah.
Roughly, give or take. That's an extortion. We said that's a lot, but...
Yeah, it's shocking. Also on our side was the Bolton Paul Defiant. That was a 2-seater fighter, and it had a can't get my words out now.
That's okay.
4-gun operated power operated turret. Now it was useful as long as you were behind the aircraft. If you were in front of it, you were fine. It couldn't shoot in front. It couldn't turn the turret around to shoot planes from behind. However, they still insisted on using these planes despite the problems with them. And they sent out numbers 141 and 264 squadrons in July and August respectively.
Okay.
They sent them out still to fly, knowing that these turrets didn't work and knowing that the Germans probably knew that. And it was quite frankly a disaster.
That is crazy.
Yeah, the planes were pulled after that. They weren't used again.
I know, I would say every person who fights in the armed forces is incredible, especially in the World Wars. But imagine knowing that you're getting into a plane that's broken.
Into a plane that didn't quite work. You probably didn't have a whole lot of training on it because they didn't have much in the way of training, did they? They mostly sort of, I think it was a couple of days, if that, and then drawn up.
They were cut from a different sort of cloth.
They were, but they were fantastic for it. I mean, we joke about the Brill Queen boys and things, but the RAF back then the RAF in general, all the armed forces were amazing.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about the other side.
One
of the most iconic German planes was the Messerschmitt, who were basically their equivalent of the Spitfire.
Okay.
But did you know they had 2 types of Messerschmitt? They had the Bf 109, which was it was faster at high altitudes than Spitfire, so it had that advantage, and it could dive quicker. That one carried 2 cannons, 2 machine guns, but there was a problem. Its fuel tanks were not very big, and it couldn't fly beyond London, and it only had 7 seconds worth of cannon ammunition.
7 seconds.
7 seconds.
They really needed to be on target when they shot us, didn't they?
Yeah. The Luftwaffe had a total of 1,100 of these Bf 109s.
Okay.
And 650 were shot down. That's about half.
Jeez, we're good.
Yep. They also had the Messerschmitt Bf 110, which was more of a heavy range fighter, so it was more of a long range one. It was called a Zerstörer in German, which means destroyer. It was well armed, but it couldn't really manoeuvre. However, it was really, really good at low-level attacks. So it was used to bomb factories, RAF airfields, things like that. They also had the Heinkel H111, which was better at the start of the war, but was more or less obsolete by 1940, and could only carry a bomb load of 2,000 kilograms. So it wasn't really useful for strategy.
Doesn't sound like either of their planes were that fabulous.
No.
They had to be very precise.
They also had the Dornier DO-17, whose nickname was the Flying Pencil.
Was it thin by any chance?
Yeah.
Pointy.
It was based on a pre-war design, which was actually for a high-speed mail plane. But then the Nazi Air Ministry converted it into a bomber during the war. And it didn't get past summer 1940, they stopped producing it then. And the last ones were Junkers, and they were the more modern ones. They first flew in December 1936, and they one of the nicknames was the Stucker. And now you're going to have to forgive my pronunciation, anyone who's German listening. It's the Sturzkampfflugzeug.
I think that wasn't too bad.
Thank you. It's basically, it was the Junker 87. That was the favourite plane of the Luftwaffe High Command, and could use pinpoint precision in a near vertical dive.
Wow.
Yep. However, on the 18th of August 1940, 12 of them were shot down, and others crashed or damaged. So, whilst they were fantastic, they were the most high precision, and the best airplanes that they had comparatively with the others. They didn't fare that well either.
Wow, fabulous.
No, not at all. I think it was due to our expertise and our pilots and everything, but you also had the expertise of the flight command.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about the flight command.
Well, Britain was divided by the RAF in geological areas called groups.
Yep.
Which obviously sounds quite simple, groups. But it was then further divided into sectors. So you had groups that were then divided into sectors. Each sector then had a main airfield called the sector station.
Right.
You with me?
With you
Groups,
so
the
far.
sectors, the sector stations.
Right.
With this, there was an operations room from which the men were directed.
Yep.
They were directed the information from the groundbreaking radar, which was pioneered in in the battles. It was passed to the filter room at the Bentley Priory. The fighter command situated just outside Watford.
So that's Bentley Priory.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so the information was then passed to the relevant groups. So Bentley Priory got the information, passed it to the groups. The groups would then send them to the sectors and then sent to the sector stations and then scrambled, and then they were given to the pilots.
Right.
So it's basically like, like a domino effect, but going down. So
Wow.
it went from Bentley down and down as it goes, obviously.
So it had to be a really efficient system, didn't it?
Yeah, it needed to be because it was... And it needed to be a system that was clear because obviously, like Chinese whispers, you hear one thing, by the time it gets to the end, it's completely changed.
Yeah.
So they needed it to be clear enough that when it went from Bentley Priory down to the pilots, it's gone through 4 or 5 stages, so it needed to be clear enough that it didn't get changed or misinterpreted or anything like that. Live updates were then relayed to the airborne fighters by radio.
Okay.
So not only was it given to the pilots, it was then sent to people who were flying.
So it definitely had to be clear to get over the radio at altitude as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is quite cool. The operation rooms were also detected anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and barrage balloons.
So not just the planes, they were in control of all of those as well.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's quite a big operation, isn't it?
Definitely, you can kind of see why Germans may have, misunderstood the might that Britain had in the RAF at this point.
Especially considering, if I'm right in thinking, a lot of those, like the sector stations and things, a lot of the operation rooms were actually underground, weren't they, in bunkers? Yeah. So they wouldn't have been able to see it. They would have just seen the airfield and a couple of buildings. They wouldn't have seen what was underground.
Yeah.
And they didn't have radar.
No, they didn't.
No. Isn't there a funny story about radar?
Yeah, actually. This is, I don't, not being mean to any Germans at all, and no offence is intended, but Germans, that old wives' tale where you used to be told, parents used to tell their kids when to make them eat their veg, eat carrots, you better see in the dark.
Yeah.
You've heard that, right?
Yeah,
Your
I've
mum and
heard
dad
that.
said it to you.
I mean, I wear glasses, it didn't work.
The Germans believed it.
So this was a World War II thing?
Yeah, they ate carrots because they believed that the English could see in the dark because they ate carrots.
So wait, they didn't know we had radar. They thought that's genuinely how we did it, by eating carrots.
And that was literally one of the Germans. They made terrible mistakes in this, right?
Yeah.
And the head of the Luftwaffe was Hermann Göring, and he failed to recognise the importance of radar. So he called off attacks on any known radar sites in August of 1940.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of a string of tactical blunders actually made by Göring, who was actually a World War I air ace and a trusted lieutenant to Adolf Hitler.
Whoops.
So, yeah, he was in World War I and he was an air ace. And So when it comes to radar, he seriously misjudged the importance of it.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
You had one job.
Yeah, he kind of did.
Yeah.
And the intelligence obviously seriously underestimated British strength and often failed to identify key bombing targets, which is probably because a lot of it was obviously underground. But another thing, just to go back to the Messerschmitt pilots, Goring ordered them to fly in close formation and guard each other
Right.
rather than pursue the enemy.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, there was something very, very similar to that one of our pilots did. Have you ever heard of Douglas Bader?
I have, and I'm not going to lie, it's because of horrible histories.
Yeah, I knew that was coming when they asked the question. If you never watch the show, do it. It's fantastic.
It's hilarious.
It's hilarious. It's not just for kids, honestly. We have learnt a hell of a lot from it.
Yes, and they do a RAF pilots? Fighter pilots song. And there is a whole
verse
to Douglas.
Yeah.
So
he had an idea with one of his commanders to fly in what's called a big wing.
Yeah.
And basically that big wing it was all the planes together in one formation. And they would come up and it would just be all in one formation, and then they would attack the Germans to kind of meet them head on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in theory, not that great. However, on the 15th of September, that really worked, because with all the other attacks that the squadrons were doing, particularly number 11 sector, who were they covered the London area, or that area, they had been harassing the Germans since they first started coming over. So talking about 8:30 in the morning, roughly, give or take.
Okay.
The first wave of German fighters came over. They'd been harassing them, and one pilot is known to have said that when he saw the big wing coming up, which is the conglomeration of all the planes, when he saw that coming up, he thought there was at least 80 odd planes in there, and it scared the bejeebers out of him. Obviously, he didn't say that. He
nice way of putting it.
Yeah. However, there was only 56. But because of all the atmosphere and everything that was being caused by the other planes, and one of the greatest defence systems this little country has, the weather, it looked like so much more, because there's a lot of reports of high winds delaying the planes from Germany over the Channel, low cloud cover, storms, things like that, causing all sorts of problems and havoc with the German equipment and with the German planes, disorientating their pilots, things like that, to the point where they dropped bombs like way off target. And I'm
shaking my head. I'm aware that we're doing a podcast and you cannot see my head shake, but it's there.
It is a kind of a running joke, though, because if you think about pretty much every invasion, more or less, at some point has had a problem with the weather. I mean, you look at the Romans, you look at the Spanish Armada, the Henry Tudor, he couldn't bring his forces over at first because of the weather, and now the Germans in the Battle of Britain couldn't because of the weather. So, thank you, British weather. We complain about you, but you're always there when we need you.
Yeah.
Right. Now on to radar.
Right, yes. Are you going to talk about the Dowling system now?
I am indeed. Now, this was a very, very clever system, and even Churchill recognised that. There was a gentleman, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, sometimes nicknamed Stuffy, and
the RAF, they do like their nicknames, didn't they?
They really do. I mean, I don't think that's changed, to be honest. I think that's still pretty much the same. Yeah. He had this complex system of what were called filter rooms and plotting maps, and they were basically large rooms where that was where the radar information went to, and then it went to loads of mostly women sitting there in headsets who would be waiting for the first news from the radar to come. And then as soon as that happened, they would then pick up their headsets, they would receive that information, and then they would put it like tiny game pieces on a giant map. And they would move them around with like shuffle sticks. Basically like a giant game of Risk.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they'd move them around according to where the radar said they were. And from there, they would be able to plot the Germans' movements and then scramble our pilots to intercept. It didn't always work, but then it really, really showed its promise on the 15th of September. because it worked fantastically and it allowed us to intercept the Germans early on and create that as a decisive victory. Churchill actually referred to it after seeing it in action on the 15th, because he went down to the bunker and actually saw it live in action. He watched that entire day, although he technically was in trouble that day because it was actually his wife's birthday.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Churchill. It was her birthday,
and he forgot.
He did.
Yeah, he forgot. So apparently, her response to him was to get her a bag of German airplanes. Which,
at least she was understanding. I
Yeah.
mean, come on.
I mean, to be fair, if you're the wife of Winston Churchill, you can't be anything but understanding.
Well,
I mean, the man barely slept. He did his work in bed and everything, so you had to be understanding. But yeah, he actually took her with him into the bunker, and
Aww.
they watched it from one of these soundproof booths up above and watched everything going on. And Churchill referred to the Dowding system as the most elaborate instrument of war.
wow.
Now that is one hell of a compliment.
Yeah.
It really is. But we've talked about the radar.
Mhm.
We've talked about the planes.
We have.
Let's have a little word about the pilots.
Okay.
Okay, so there were, by calling it the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force, it's not really giving full credit to the pilots themselves.
Yeah.
Because
More than 15% of the put my words back. What? Oh.
try again.
More than 15% of the RAF pilots weren't actually British.
No, they came from all over the Commonwealth and occupied Europe as well. So you had pilots from places like New Zealand, New South Wales, Poland, Czechoslovakia.
Canada?
Yeah, Canada. Loads and loads more than just the British, and they were fantastic. And this is where we're going to give a little honorary notice here.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a character that only just came to light during our research here, and his name is Josef František, and he was a Czech pilot with number 303 Fighter Squadron, and has the accolade of being the highest scoring pilot of the battle. His squadron had 126 kills, and became Fighter Command's highest claiming squadron, despite only joining the battle on the 31st of August.
Wow.
Yeah. He was originally from Czechoslovakia. However, when the Czech government said that the people should peacefully allow the German invasion, he then fled to Poland, fought with Poland. After Poland fell, went to France. After France fell, came to England. And to be honest with you, their loss was our gain. He was fantastic. Unfortunately, he was killed in action, which is a great loss. But he was incredible. So notable mention here to Josef František, and to, in fact, all of the pilots. Thank you. And
Did you say there's a movie being made?
Yeah, there is. It's coming out soon, based on the number 303 Squadron, and I think it might be slated for release possibly later on this year. If we find out more about it, we'll put it in the info. But judging by some of the cast, it's due to be a really good film, and František is a character in it as well.
Yeah.
But it's not just the pilots.
Yes.
And we also have to talk about the riggers, the fitters, the armourers, repair and maintenance engineers that worked in the ground crews, your factory workers, your observation corps, that were actually made up of thousands of volunteers, and they would often stand on the roofs of buildings with binoculars looking out for the Germans, making themselves a pretty visible target sometimes. There was also the anti-aircraft gunners, the searchlight operators, barrage balloon crews, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force.
Hey, big up the ladies.
And the Home Guard, also known as local defence volunteers, who had nearly 1.5 million men enrolled by July 1940.
That's a ridiculous amount of men to have by the 1940.
It was. And it worked to make the Battle of Britain the most major German defeat in World War II.
It was, because with the failure of Germany to establish air supremacy, the Battle of Britain was, as you said, the first major defeat of Hitler's military forces, and it is actually regarded by several historians as a crucial turning point to the Second World War. The RAF achieved the greatest victory in preventing the plan of Nazi Germany to knock Great Britain out of the war, thus providing the Allied forces an important base in Europe.
Yeah, they definitely did that. I mean, I don't honestly know how the war would have gone without that victory.
No.
So, that's pretty much, in a nutshell, that's it for the Battle of Britain. Firstly, obviously, a massive, massive thank you. The vast majority of you are gone now, but a massive thank you to each and every one of you, whether in the sky or on the ground.
Yeah, personally for me, I think, like you said, a lot of people aren't with us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as the younger generations and younger than us, I think it's like our duty to continue to teach and to talk about and remember World Wars 1 and 2, because as the people who were in it are no longer here,
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't do anything back there. We weren't even born for another,
No.
30, 40 years. But if we can just teach it to somebody else to keep remembering it, I think that's our right, and that's how we can do our part for a war that has been over for 78 years since that battle.
Yeah, and especially one that I don't think anybody has not been touched by that war in some respect. So, for
No.
example, I can state that my great uncle Jack, my
Yep.
nan's half brother, he was in the Navy in World War II. He was at Dunkirk. He returned from Dunkirk, and he was actually in an air raid in Birmingham, where my family's from. And him and my granddad, who was an intelligence officer, during this air raid, in the aftermath of the air raid, they were trying to get this family out of a house that had collapsed, and the family had been trapped inside. My granddad said to his dying day, this was one of his regrets, Uncle Jack went back into the house, and Granddad sent him back in, and the house collapsed, and he died.
Wow.
So that's a story that links me to the war, and to be honest with you, you can only understand history by your own personal links to it.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's been untouched.
No.
So,
Want to leave on a slightly lighter note.
we do.
We are coming to the end, and normally we do a ridiculous death. But I feel that no death in World War II can be said as ridiculous. It was too big of a thing, and it's still too raw, too fresh to
Yeah.
call any of the deaths ridiculous. So, we found something else, haven't we, Gary?
We found a ridiculous survival. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the story of Raymond Tower Holmes, who was a British Royal Air Force fighter pilot during the Second World War and fought on that fateful day, the 15th of September. And here is what happened to him on the 15th of September. His plane, basically, he rammed another plane in his to try and get them down, and he was trying to stop them from bombing Buckingham Palace. There was a Dornier that was heading towards the Buckingham Palace, and he avoided the machine gun fire, and he got round in front of the Dornier, and he decided that his machine guns had failed.
Oh, God.
So instead of basically firing at the plane, he fired himself at the plane, and he rammed the bomber. He flew his plane into the top side of it, cutting off the rear tail. And this is his account, these are his actual words. As I fired, my ammunition gave out. I thought, hell, he's got away now. And there he was coming along, and his tail looked very fragile and very inviting, so I thought I'd just take off the tip of his tail. So I went straight at it along him and hit his port fin with my port wing. I thought that will just take his fin off, and he'll never get home without the tail fin. I didn't allow for the fact that the tail fin was actually part of the main fuselage. Although I didn't know it at the time, I found out later that I'd knocked the whole back half of the aircraft off, including the twin tails. That's all. I mean, he saved it.
He did.
However, his Hurricane then went down,
Oh.
and he ejected. And he basically the pilot of the Dornier, Feldwebel Robert Zieber, bailed out, and he unfortunately died later of wounds. But Holmes also, his Hurricane crashed 20 yards from where a group of people had been playing football near the grounds of Buckingham Palace.
Okay.
He himself ejected. And this is his story about how he ejected. This is his ridiculous survival.
Okay.
I got hold of the guy ropes and stopped the spinning and looked down. I was right over the railway lines running into Victoria Station. I thought, hell, I'm going to get electrocuted now after this.
Oh, God.
Then I was swinging towards a row of houses. I hit the roof of one and could not get any grip on the slates in my stockinged feet. I slithered down the roof until I got to the gutter and thought, now I'm going to break my back and kill myself falling off a 3-storey house. But as I fell, there was a sudden jerk and I stopped with just my toes on the ground. My canopy had snagged over an up pipe running past the gutter that had stopped me, but both my feet were inside a dustbin. The lid was on the ground, the bin has obviously just been emptied. My 2 toes touched the bottom of the bin, but my heels were off the ground. So basically, he plummeted down towards electrified rail fences, got blown by a gust of wind into a roof, then went to fall off the roof, potentially to his death. His parachute got caught, and he landed with his toes just barely touching the ground.
That is ridiculous.
That is...
Someone was smiling down on him that day. He was supposed to survive.
He was. That was Ray Holmes, and that was TARDIS After Hours.
Thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you next week.
Bye.